Don't believe it. It's a cult.
You are cultists feeding off people's naivety. Shame on you.
Freedom of speech. Anyone can call any group of people a cult, and it's not illegal.
These are just some of the comments you leave under our videos. But trust me, what you send in private messages is much worse. You call us a cult, lost, brainwashed people. And we ask the authors of these messages, please tell us, who brainwashed you? I'm not joking. But do you know who introduced the word cult and for what purpose? And do you know the consequences of labeling someone as a cult? Today, we're going to talk about this. And by the end, you'll definitely agree with me when I say that labeling someone with this word should be punished, just like denial of the Holocaust is punished. Stay with us, and you'll understand why.
To start, I'd like to share my experience with this label. It was 2019, and we had just held a great conference, Society: The Last Chance. And as an international public movement, we started to become more visible, and naturally, this wave of activity also brought a wave of opposition. It wasn't yet in the national and state media, but on private pages of some people who expressed their subjective opinions about us. And then one day, I received a message from my client who said he had been warned in a certain way about Alatra. And since I'm a pleasant woman, and he wants the people he respects to be happy, he wrote to me and sent me a link to this very slanderous article. Honestly, it came as a huge shock at first. I was overwhelmed with emotions. It was the first time I had encountered this. Fear came over me, fear that I would lose all my clients and what would happen next. After all, we're not doing anything wrong. What's going on? And as time went on, these comments kept coming. They come in private messages and under our videos. And somehow, it became an everyday or frequent rhetoric.
I remember when that first article came out in a major Slovak media outlet. It was 2022, December. I remember sitting in a bistro having lunch and starting to read this article. Honestly, my throat tightened because you're reading how someone is mixing up everything, adding complete nonsense. But at the same time, you understand that it's black and white, that everyone has read it, and for all these people, it is the truth. And you understand that you don't have the possibility to publish your opinion on the front page the next day, saying, please, this and that is not true. It's a huge feeling of helplessness for a person. You feel fear, anxiety, tension. And I must say that when reading these comments under those articles, the real fear is that some crazy person might take justice into their own hands and just wait for you somewhere. Because in reality, the goal of these articles is precisely that, to turn people against you. And imagine going, for example, to a reunion after 25 years with all this burden. You understand the lens through which these people are now looking at you.
Yes, I've had personal experience with that. At a reunion after many years, you realize that many people you used to regularly see, with whom you spent a lot of time, and everything was great and so on, haven't heard from you in a long, long time, but they've read these articles. Of course, they may have seen you share something on social media, but these articles put everything in a particular light. And you come to that reunion, and it's not like anyone is attacking you or treating you with disrespect, but you feel that something is different, that they look at you differently, and something lingers in the air, but no one starts the topic. Only after hours and hours does a former classmate have the courage to ask about it. But then they quickly drop the subject. And you don't bring it up either because what would you say? Let's talk about Allatra and set the record straight. What it is, what we're trying to do? No, because no one is even asking. The lens is so strong that people are afraid to open the topic at all.
Well, my experience is that it's stressful for both sides. They perceive some kind of threat created by the media, and they don't really know how to react in real life when they see the person who is supposed to be that threat. And precisely this phase of these slanderous articles serves what is called dehumanization. It may sound abstract, but this example shows very well how it works and what it's for. A person, pressured by these thoughts, emotions, and fear, decides to stay home and avoid such a reunion, wanting to spare themselves an awkward, unpleasant time. Thus, they do not confront these people with the reality of who they are. And, as a result, these people continue to reinforce that image of the cultist in themselves. And the purpose of this is to numb people's conscience so that later they agree with some, like us, Allatra members, from social functioning or the public sphere. But on the other hand, if a person decides to go to that reunion, then those people see you are a normal person just like them, that you have the same problems. You have kids, you go to work, you deal with a mortgage, and this huge inflated bubble caused by these defamatory articles bursts very quickly. That's why it's so important for us to overcome this fear and confront people with who we really are, and not allow this strong image of a cultist to dominate among people.
Indeed, the media is full of information about cults. They warn us about cults, about the dangers, about ongoing investigations, and shout, "Watch out, it's a cult." Some of the media headlines scream sensationally. But if we really think about it, we can ask ourselves, what does the word cult even mean? If we reflect on this, we'll realize, as you already mentioned, that it's nothing more than a giant empty bubble filled with negativity and energy by certain groups of people. The media primarily supports and spreads this information. We can say that over the past few decades, this word has taken on a completely different charge. The term cult had a very different energy 50 years ago, and even more so 500 years ago.
Well, not only the energy itself, the very meaning of the word was completely neutral, and in certain parts of the world it remains absolutely neutral.
Yes, but today, especially in this region, the word it has a powerful emotional and ideological charge and is always associated with the idea of a certain group of people who are either brainwashed or have replaced their own self with a cultist self. But what we can say for certain is that there is no unified legal definition of the word cult. And the European Court of Human Rights recently condemned Bulgaria, stating that labeling a religious minority as a cult exposes it to negative consequences, and that public authorities should avoid using such defamatory terms. So despite the European Court's recommendation, and that of many organizations recognizing that this word is extremely negative and shouldn't be used, we still see and read it in the media quite often. Furthermore, it's worth noting that even though there is no legal term for cult or sect, certain groups of people can still be punished without cause.
Yes, punished and discriminated against.
Exactly.
Essentially, it's based on the opinion of a certain group that has appointed itself as the arbiter of what is right, and how we, as a society, should think and what we should defend ourselves against, even though the decision of the European Court says the complete opposite, that this word shouldn't be used at all. When we look at what the leading Czech anti-cultist claims, it seems paradoxical what he wrote in his article. Let's be clear. The term cult has, due to its pejorative nature, lost its place in scholarly religious studies and even in legal terminology. It never had a place. That's my addition. But it is generally used more like an insult in parentheses, as an expression of disagreement and distancing, which is associated with the realm of religion. Because it's primarily an insult, it must be rejected. These are very nice words from the leading representative of the Czech anti-cult movement, a group that actively promotes and supports the anti-cult narrative in the media. And I wonder, what is it supposed to mean? I would actually compare it to painting the facade of your house white, to make it look really nice on the outside. And I ask, who is this house supposed to look nice for when, behind its walls, the worst atrocities are taking place? In the case of the anti-cultists, it's for fellow religious scholars, for the academic community, for real researchers, scholars of religion and sociologists who genuinely study religion from a scientific perspective, using scientific and relevant methods. And for some reason, since about 2012, they have remained silent in the face of these defamation campaigns that are continually led by the anti-cultists. It's incomprehensible. So, this pretty facade is being created for them, while behind those walls, real atrocities are happening. Because when we look at where all this leads, where anti-cult activities are given free rein, that is, in totalitarian regimes, it actually ends in genocide of innocent people, of a huge number of people. And what strikes me even more about this statement from a religious scholar, the representative of the Czech anti-cultists, is the claim that the word cult has no legal basis. It has no legal basis. But what does that mean in reality? It means that when you label a group in this way, giving it this pejorative image, which we all understand as a very strong negative image, then, as a group, you have no way to defend yourself. It's very difficult to defend against such a label. And if you do defend yourself, as the example of the Scientologist shows, while you might achieve something, in public opinion,
It remains.
this is exactly why this word should be completely unacceptable. It should be part of a discriminatory vocabulary that is not allowed, just like kike or nigger, and so on. And once someone uses this insult, this pejorative term as a social weapon against someone, against a group, against people, they must be held criminally responsible.
You've heard what we, in the Alatra movement, are going through. But it's not happening only to us. It's happening to various groups from various fields. These could be political parties, business corporations, interest groups, educational systems.
Yes, a case involving an educational group also occurred in Slovakia. It was related to Waldorf education. This happened around 2008 to 2009. The first Waldorf school in Slovakia was established, which was part of the network of schools since 2001 and was in so-called experimental evaluation to see if its students would be able to continue on to secondary schools and beyond. What happened, and we know this pattern very well, is that first, there was some dissatisfaction from a few parents who left, And then a report aired on a private Slovak television where Waldorf education was labeled a cult. We understand that it wasn't about Waldorf education itself, but about specific people, a specific place, and the parents and children involved. What was the key issue? And why was Waldorf education labeled cultist? It was based on so-called anthroposophy, which means an approach to the human being that also considers their spiritual component, something Steiner promoted. Waldorf education is based on Steiner's teachings, but it wasn't about teaching anthroposophy at the Waldorf school. The issue was that the teachers there were believed to be influenced by this teaching, this spiritual view of the human being. And through this lens, they would see their students and shape them accordingly. What we also know very well is this. I found blogs and statements from parents who wanted to express themselves in the public space after the report, and almost all of them said, "We don't understand what these critics are talking about."
But the critics present it in such a professional way that it seems like there might be something to it.
And they distort public opinion.
Yes, and that's why the Waldorf school had 4 expert evaluations conducted. All of them came from reputable institutions, such as Masaryk University in Brno. 3 of these institutions, or rather 3 of the evaluations, had a clear stance. In their opinion, Waldorf pedagogy does not show signs of cultism. Only one report, issued by the Institute for State-Church Relations, stated that it observed such elements. So
Wait a minute, but that means we have 3 evaluations here and 3 evaluations that completely deny it, meaning evaluations from the Slovak Academy of Sciences, Masaryk University, and then there's this one evaluation that says it might be a bit different.
Yes, and that's why I looked more closely at this Institute for State-Church Relations and found their annual report from 2004. I discovered that this institute, which no longer exists, but at the time collaborated on an international level with the organization FECRIS, an anti-cult organization which we already know very well. In the annual report, it was written that this institute had to fulfill obligations arising from this cooperation.
Obligations?
Obligations. And we already know very well that FECRIS collaborates with RESIRS, the anti-cult organization in Russia. Not only collaborates, but the chairman of RESIRS is also a member of FECRIS leadership. And as we know from the Impact documentary, there have been multiple lawsuits against FECRIS, where they were found guilty of defamation and persecution of various, even religious groups. The fact that anti-cult organizations are bothered by educational systems that take a holistic view of the human being, including their spiritual aspect, is also evident in the strong campaign that was led in Russia against the Russian ancestral school of academician Shchetinin, which was likewise labeled a sect, cult, in Russia. This happened despite the fact that UNESCO declared the educational system of the Russian ancestral school the best in the world for 3 consecutive years. And after learning this, it's no longer surprising that the attempt to establish such a school in Slovakia was quickly destroyed by a very strong.
So basically,
using the evaluations from the Integra Association, who in their assessments cite organizations like RESIRS.
well, okay. So what we're seeing here is certain obligations being fulfilled toward these international organizations, in the sense that we are promoting the views of a particular group of people who appoint themselves as arbiters of correctness. And they are saying, no, here in Slovak society, we forbid this. We are preventing the implementation of an educational system that UNESCO repeatedly named the best in the world for 3 years in a row. So this is what this organization is doing for society, preventing access to quality education. Is that how we're supposed to understand it?
I also have a quote from the Integra website here, which I'd like to read. When our state representatives can no longer put obstacles in the way of cultist raids, we would like state funds and authorities not to serve just to feed and protect totalitarian groups, a clear example of which is the School of Academician Szczecinin.
What more is there to say?
What more is there to say? So how would I sum it up? Anti-cults create cults from nothing by labeling a group as a cult or sect and claiming that this group is dangerous or harmful to society. Then, as the second step, the media, which are usually paid and more interested in sensationalism than facts, very gladly jump on this cult topic because they see the potential for growing their audience, increasing sales, and boosting readership. And this whole thing wouldn't have any real power if it weren't for the defectors or apostates and their testimonies, because all their stories are built on that.
Yes, and these very defectors are a very important part of all anti-cult campaigns. We talk to many organizations and associations, and they confirm exactly the same scenario and the same scheme. Take any association or religious group. After all, it is quite normal for people to come and go. Some people always leave, maybe quietly, having realized that the group didn't meet their expectations or didn't lead them in the right direction, or they just took it as an experience.
Like in a company?
Like in a company, yes, or they just take it as an experience and move on. About 10% of people leave. We actually found this statistic in an excellent article about defectors on the Act Files portal. The source is Massimo Intravigne, who studies this topic intensively. So we have these 10% who leave as biased defectors, or very negatively inclined defectors. Sometimes these are people who dreamed of fame or power within the organization, or wanted to push their own agenda. And when they fail to do so, they leave. And the anti-cultists quickly find them, because these people are like golden eggs for the anti-cult. They put them in the spotlight, give them fame, and the illusion of power. They help them organize lectures. These people are part of conferences. They get huge media coverage, and they are given the opportunity to speak about the given group.
And it's not just, it's attention and recognition. Mainly, it's recognition that you are doing something good for society because you are actually warning against that dangerous cult.
Yes. And when we consider it, every anti-cult organization declares its goals to protect families, children, and to help victims. And this is exactly the kind of victim they need, a cult victim. As I've said before, it's very important for anti-cult organizations because victims confirm the truthfulness of all the dirt. As if they experienced it firsthand, they share their own experience, and they are exactly the ones who kind of understood the whole manipulation.
They present the information in such a way that it fits exactly into the already created image.
Exactly. And as I mentioned earlier, this happens across all organizations. Of course, the Allatra International Public Movement is no exception. We also have a former member who claims to have held a high-ranking position. Let me clarify right away that such positions don't exist in the Allatra International Public Movement. And what's connected to this is that people, under our videos, often share the testimony of this former member as the most credible source. The public turns to her, our friends turn to her. And what's especially paradoxical is that the claims of this person, who is viewed as a defector, are much more credible to the public, to our family members, and our friends than our own statements. So this is what the public and public opinion do. However, if we take a court expert who is tasked with assessing whether a given organization,
whether it's dangerous or not,
yes, whether it's dangerous or not, or whether there is something suspicious going on, when they are tasked with assessing this organization truthfully, as these experts themselves say, they never place much weight on the testimonies of these former members or defectors because it's assumed that they are biased, and therefore, their testimony lacks objective value. And these experts investigate what the public should also be looking into. They review websites, they study speeches, and they also study other members who are visible and who, for example, speak on behalf of the given organization.
Basically, she got that media space and the opportunity to speak.
I'd like to further explain the credibility of these defectors using an analogy. Because it's just like in the workplace. People come and people go, some quietly, some loudly. But when you want to know how things truly work in a company, who will give you a better picture? Will it be a current employee or someone who left in anger and is now bad-mouthing the company?
I was listening to that podcast I mentioned earlier, and it's exactly what lands in our personal messages as the ultimate argument. Oh, so you're not a cult? Well then, look at this. Listen to this. It's like,
Wake up.
wake up or snap out of
I
it.
usually hear the sentence, "This was enough for me. This was enough for me to hear."
This was all I needed to hear. Well, this is what we get from friends, from haters or those friends who mean well, in quotes. And actually, when I was listening to that podcast, it filled me with despair, to be honest. Despair at how easy it is to create the illusion of a single truth. That this is how it is. And even more so when you use words like conscience or truth. And how easy it is to impose this illusion on people. To present events. A person always describes events purely through their subjective lens. It's just how it is. But if thousands of others had the chance to speak about the same events, they would likely describe them in entirely different ways. And you mentioned that true experts never rely on the testimonies of apostates because they understand the inherent bias and distortion that come with it. However, the public simply doesn't do that. On the contrary, for someone listening to this, it's clear and precise. And we have 30 years of propaganda about what a cult is, and it fits right into the picture. And when you listen to the podcast, the way the jingles are selected, the way the questions are framed, the way the information is presented, it all fits perfectly into that prefabricated image. What I would like to say about the podcast itself is, where did this image come from? It's an image that was exactly propagated by the Russian razziers. Russian razziers who have committed unbelievable crimes through their propaganda in the Russian Federation against innocent people. And the international public movement *ALLATRA is no exception. Then there's the American organization CAN, Cult Awareness Network, which had to be shut down for crimes against humanity and for destroying the lives of countless people. These are the organizations that created this image. Stephen Hassan, as one of the representatives of CAN at the time, a very active one, although he is not an expert in
He's also basically a defector himself.
He's certainly not a scholar in religious studies or someone who professionally engages in these topics. But he is a very active writer and producer of anti-cult ideas. Let's put it simply. He's someone whose rhetoric and public appearances have destroyed the lives of millions of people through anti-cult media campaigns. He was a deprogrammer. He is a person who directly participated in this. If you look at the Impact documentary, it clearly outlines the historical contexts. And this is the person, the anti-cultist, who interviews the former member. He cites him in the podcast as an example, presenting him as a defector. He left some group.
He woke up, came to his senses.
And he is an example of someone whose actions have destroyed the lives of a huge number of people.
You mentioned the Impact documentary. I'd like to highlight it even more because it brilliantly shows how the anti-cult operates, what schemes they use, how they've refined their methods over the years, and how they terrorize society, ruthlessly pursuing their goals. For me, the greatest value is that after watching that documentary, you start recognizing these schemes in everyday life. So I definitely recommend watching this documentary film, The Impact.
I completely agree because, to be honest, my perception of religious movements was also shaped by the propaganda that's been going on here for 30 years. It wasn't until I watched this documentary that I realized how much I've fallen prey to this well-crafted, long-term,
Manipulation.
very sophisticated propagandistic manipulation, which has absolutely nothing to do with legal decisions, court rulings, or real research, and is based purely on the opinion of a certain group of people. And if we look at the development of the current global situation, do you know where anti-cult groups are thriving the most? Where do they manage to achieve their ultimate goal?
In Russia.
In totalitarian regimes.
Because they lead to totalitarianism.
They themselves lead to totalitarianism through their narrative. And where totalitarianism already reigns, there they manage to eliminate groups, physically eliminate, persecute, and torture people. And we understand that this is the ultimate goal of this rhetoric. And therefore, when I return to the seemingly nice white facade of the Czech anti-cult, I realize how monstrous it is to wear such a mask. And what do anti-cultists in every country claim to stand for?
As if to protect children, protect victims, protect people, they claim to have such noble goals.
They attack.
They declare,
Yes, very noble goals. And where they have enough power and long enough reach, they aim to take children away from peaceful and happy families. Where do these children end up? Coming from totalitarian regimes. For sale, to pedophiles. In Turkey, is that child protection?
the internet is full of stories where such children end up.
This is what the anti-cult does.
They claim to be caring for these children under the guise of noble goals. And there's also an absurdity when it comes to these defectors. I just want to add that the absurdity is that the media portrays one person as the most credible source, and then, when they give us the opportunity to speak, they always frame it as if we're the ones with brainwashed minds. Our statements are portrayed as biased and unobjective.
Basically, if we do a quick summary, we all have brainwashed minds. The whole society. We have been brainwashed for 30 years by the rhetoric of the anti-cult. That's what the Impact showed us.
Exactly.
It's hard to imagine how things could reach a point where someone's children are taken away. how labeling someone as a cultist can go this far, even here in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. We came across a case we'd like to share with you that happened in the Czech Republic. It involved a group centered around Jiří Vácek. He was a Czech mystic, and at one point, an anti-cult organization, particularly the most prominent anti-cultist, began to show interest in this group. And Mr. Vácek, under the pretense of friendly inquiry into new religious movements, he started contacting and meeting with them in various ways. And so, from this friendly meeting, an anonymous report emerged, which was sent to the Fund for Children at Risk.
Anonymous?
Anonymous. And by the end of the entire investigation, it wasn't possible to find out who wrote that report. But that didn't matter to the court. The report stated that Jiří Vácek was a totalitarian leader who held the only absolute truth, which couldn't be confronted. He demanded absolute loyalty from his members, and those who didn't comply became enemies. This very personal report, full of many details, also implicated another family, close friends of Jiří Vácek. And based on these various lies and unprofessional statements, this family and their little daughter were harassed and investigated for several months, and the Fund for Children at Risk expressed the opinion that this could lead to the daughter being taken away from their care.
All because of an anonymous report.
Exactly, an anonymous report. And it was also an utterly absurd situation because the girl was doing well in school, had hobbies appropriate for her age, danced, and was perfectly happy and content in that family. And based on all these facts, at least for me, a completely legitimate question arose. Who was the real threat to this little girl? The parents, who engaged in some spiritual activities in their free time, or these anti-cultists, who created conditions where this girl was constantly stressed, scrutinized, investigated, and made to feel uncertain about what would happen next?
Well, if you think about it, since it was an anonymous report, I can't help but react. Because, in that case, it means that anyone can send such a report if it's anonymous. Based on an anonymous report, a quasi-investigation took place to determine whether something inappropriate was happening, all under the guise of protecting the child. And what was the outcome?
The report was sent from the Institute for the Study of Sects, so it wasn't completely anonymous, but it was sent without an author precisely from this institution. In the end, the daughter wasn't taken away, but it seems to me a complete absurdity that the official reason for the existence of anti-cult organizations is the protection of victims. And in the legal field, they publicly justify what they do, their so-called noble deeds. But ultimately, when we think about it, the real victims are those left behind after their work, those victims who are supposedly being protected by them.
And it's great luck that this happened in a democratic country.
Exactly.
Because if it hadn't happened in a democratic country, it very likely wouldn't have ended well for that girl.
Exactly.
Speaking of Jiří Vácek, who you mentioned, I was literally shocked by the information from one of his analyses, where he writes that in Bavaria, job applicants must sign a statement that they are not members of organizations that anti-cult movements have labeled as dangerous. To me, this is completely unbelievable. That the legislation relies on some lists from a criminal organization.
What's even more interesting is the fact that this very report by Mr. Vacek, who somehow evaluated everything that happened to him, to this family, and to the community, basically, this man described in 2012 exactly what's shown in the film The Impact. He described the scheme of how it happens.
Exactly the scheme of how anti-cult organizations operate. And when you say legislation, but that's not how it works, because actually, in Germany, as a democratic country, when someone applies for a public position, they do not rely on the law. They don't rely on laws, on court rulings, or meaning any actual legal processes that have concluded this is a dangerous organization. No. They rely on the opinion of an organization that has self-appointed itself as the arbiter of what is true.
But can you imagine the influence they have on the authorities?
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
That's powerful.
Yes, it's another group, but we don't even have to go that far. We are all participants of the international public movement ALLATRA. And what is ALLATRA? ALLATRA is a worldwide peace movement that seeks to solve and offers a solution to the climate crisis. It brings together absolutely peaceful people, and what happens? ALLATRA also ended up on the anti-cult organizations lists, and since 2015, there has been an ongoing slander campaign against us. So, when we talk about all these groups, their experiences, we have the right to talk about it because we ourselves are experiencing labeling, marking, and bullying in some countries.
It's been 10 years now. 10 years of genocide.
Genocide.
Let's call it what it is because it can't end any other way.
Yes, in some countries we still have, I'd say, more freedom. We can speak out, we can sit like this freely. But in some countries, it is no secret that in Russia, the international public movement is banned. We are given various labels. Our participants there are labeled agents. In Ukraine, they are labeled agents of Russian Special Services. In Russia, they are labeled agents of Ukrainian Special Services. In addition, we are also labeled reptilians, mentally ill people. We are
Soros gang.
We are Soros's gang, Putin's gang. They just can't agree.
A Japanese cult, I've seen that too.
Yes.
A Japanese cult?
A Japanese cult. And all this harassment leads to the fact that many of our people are losing their jobs. There were several roundtables where our participants shared their stories. We cannot organize our public activities where we, for example, inform the public about the climate crisis. When we have something arranged in advance, suddenly the event is canceled. Basically, we cannot freely exist in this democratic country because we have been labeled by anti-cult organizations.
And the rest is carried out by the public through silent discrimination.
We have specific cases, such as in Russia, where people are prosecuted just for posting or reposting an article from the ALLATRA TV website or sharing information from Egon Cholakian. In Ukraine, there have been numerous house searches where people's personal belongings were confiscated, and legal proceedings are also underway against them.
So, in Russia, they reposted a video, and for that, they were summoned. They weren't even allowed to go to the bathroom.
The dehumanization process took place. It involved them being harassed throughout the entire process from the beginning. They were not allowed.
Contact their legal representative.
Lawyer. It was basically predetermined how it was supposed to end.
Psychological
terror.
And friends, this is how things work in a totalitarian regime. Thank you. But it all starts with the anti-cult rhetoric that triggers all the following steps. It infiltrates even government bodies and manipulates public opinion.
And all this happens because the media helps them. Egon Cholakian himself said that $200 million has been spent on discrediting Allatra, and more than 600 defamatory articles have been published worldwide. And we see them in our information space as well.
And this is based on the findings of the American intelligence services. So it's definitely a credible figure. The investigation is ongoing, and we are watching closely.
Yes, but look, it's all happening publicly, right in front of everyone. Who stood up for us? Who stood up for human rights? For people who did nothing wrong? No one. And most importantly, who will stop this harassment, this public execution?
Have you ever seen anyone comment under an article with defamatory comments saying, "For God's sake, they are humans too. Treat them with respect"? Have you ever come across anything like that?
I hope someone's at least thought like that.
The point is, we haven't broken any laws. Yet for 10 years we've been bullied, accused, insulted, and no one stepped in. Where were law enforcement agencies? Where were law officials? What were they doing? Why did they not intervene? Is that okay? Because for me, this is the path to totalitarianism. It is essential to realize that no one, under any circumstances, has the right to infringe on our freedom. We've been harassed for 10 years, and for the suffering we endured, we have every right to demand compensation and support from the state and from other states that harbored these scoundrels and financed them, from all the organizations that funded this. And the most crucial thing is that no one has the right to prohibit someone from living as they want, as long as they do not break the law.
Exactly.
Allatra has been harassed for 10 years, but during that time, thanks to the patience, heroism, and bravery of Allatra members, it was possible to investigate the activities of anti-cultism. And as we can see, everything has come to light. Now we can stop all this because the schemes are clear. The players are clear. Their goal is clear. And the investigation is already underway. Everyone will be held accountable in a new Nuremberg trial, because crimes against humanity and genocide cannot be statute barred.
Exactly. Yesterday, you were just normal people. Today, thanks to the media, you're labeled a cult. It's a label that is very difficult, virtually impossible to shake off. A terrible label with no real way to get rid of it.
This is also confirmed by the case of Waldorf pedagogy that we just mentioned today. Because 16 years after these events, and despite all the expert assessments, you still meet people who hold the opinion or write on social media that Waldorf pedagogy is a cult.
If you look at what Scientologists do, honestly, what I've heard all my life about Scientologists is that they are one of the most dangerous cults. And I completely uncritically accepted that narrative. 30 years of propaganda.
Same here.
And what do Scientologists do? They sue for every slanderous thing that's said or written about them in the media. They have won many lawsuits. But what did that do for them? In my opinion, that information never reached me. If I hadn't seen the Impact documentary, if I hadn't started looking into it myself, because I'm also part of the public, I would have died believing that Scientologists are the most dangerous cult. This is how we are conditioned. This is how these labels work. Will lawsuits help you?
You won't get rid of that label.
A práve antikultisti spôsobili, že toto neutrálne slovo sekta.
Well, it was the anti-cultists who turned the neutral word cult into something extremely negative. They've even escalated it because now we hear terms like totalitarian cult, apocalyptic cult, destructive cult. And we know that such stigmatization is a very powerful tool for shaping public opinion, for dividing society.
Zároveň sa povyšuje jedna skupina, ponižuje iná skupina.
What we see now is one group being elevated, while another is degraded, labeled as a cult, making them inferior in the eyes of society.
Well, it's also important to say that it has another side of the coin. Not only does the group that's labeled a cult lose the ability to develop freely, because how can you grow when people refuse to talk to you, when you're not given space to share information, when you don't have the opportunity? So where do you develop? Instead, you're just stuck constantly trying to prove, I'm not a cultist, I'm not a cultist, I'm really not.
You're just apologizing and explaining that you actually...
What are you spending your time on, right? What are you spending your time doing? And on the other hand, society itself is degrading because of this.
The whole society is degrading.
The whole society is degrading because of this.
It cannot progress.
And I'm not just talking about the so-called cults.
Yes.
But society as a whole. Because it actually adopts this discourse, this direction.
Yes, towards totalitarianism. History has shown us where the stigmatization of Jews led. And now, as we have said, dear viewers, just realize how dangerous this stigmatization and labeling of groups is. That's why we say that the word cult is a Nazi term, a piece of Nazi propaganda. And we would like to ask the viewers, or those who label us and other groups this way, whose side are you on when you call us and others a cult? That's why we are publicly and loudly saying that the word cult should be banned. Because we know where this leads. And as a society, we should also be calling out those who use this word in the public space, telling them that by using this word, they are siding with Nazism. And we should ask them, whose side are you on? Whose interest do you serve? Who are you standing with? And we can also ask this question, do you want to destroy innocent people?
Do you understand the consequences of calling someone a cultist?
Do you understand what kind of social machine gun you are aiming at people when you use the word cult? It's social destruction, plain and simple.
And the way public opinion is influenced to portray a particular group as a cult can be clearly seen in the case of Alatra.
Speaking from personal experience, as Alatra and as other organizations will confirm, you have no idea that anti-cult groups even exist. They're completely in the shadows. You only start to realize they're there once they set their sights on you, once they slap that label on you.
Once they start making your life a living hell.
When the hell begins. And now imagine you, as an organization or group, you're just getting started, just trying to get your bearings, but the anti-cultists already have 30 years of experience. They have well-worn paths, they have a lot of money being poured into it. They have their organizations all over the world and a whole network. And basically, practice shows that many organizations, that the anti-cultists targeted by anti-cultists don't last long. Because they simply can't stand up to such immense evil and deal with it all. And what practice also shows is that anti-cultists don't care at all if you take them to court, if you sue them. They've already done their job. They've already labeled you. And as we can see, that label cannot be washed off, and no one has ever come forward to apologize. Even though we say that this label shouldn't be used, it continues to be applied. So, the anti-cultists have a whole network of helpers who assist them in discrediting a certain movement. And we've experienced this firsthand in our international public movement *ALLATRA*. And the Impact film, which we've mentioned several times already, revealed to us that this smear campaign is orchestrated by the Russian anti-cult group Razziers. We've talked about this network. This group has branches and organizations all over the world, and they have their helpers in both the Czech Republic and Slovakia. This network operates very efficiently, very organized, very connected, and you get the impression that once they target a movement and label it a cult, other organizations and partner websites confirm this label. And thus, it creates the impression in the whole society that it's true, that it's a fact. Public opinion buys into it, and organizations like the *ALLATRA* International Public Movement become discredited.
And when you start digging into it, you find out that one article cites another. For example, Slovakia's Integra refers to Czech anti-cultists, and it goes round and round, constantly cross-referencing.
They keep confirming each other's claims.
Exactly. And sometimes they may even cite media articles from the media that they themselves, as anti-cultists, approved, giving them an air of legitimacy. So basically, it's still the same group of people, the same gang, really.
Yes, you can see how organized and internationally connected they are. For example, Dworkin was awarded an honor at Prešov University. And in the Czech Republic, their main anti-cultist references Agard, who founded the International Dialogue Center, an anti-cult center in Denmark.
And then we see that in the end, some guy who was teaching Satanism to children in Africa comments on it all in a video. Like, I'm telling you, when someone sends this as a credible source of information, I just don't get it.
Well, anti-cultists accuse other organizations and groups of doing what they themselves are actually guilty of. And their organization over the past 30 years shows that they have been untouchable and unpunished. Because the scheme works, money is poured into it, and this very impunity, as you said, allows them to dehumanize any group or person with a completely cold heart.
With a sense of impunity.
Yes, until recently they had impunity. But thanks to the Impact film and the exposure of all their manipulation techniques, all the atrocities and crimes they've committed against innocent people, violating democracy, an investigation is already underway. Every anti-cultist and every person involved in anti-cultism will be held accountable in a court, just like the Nazis were held accountable at the Nuremberg Tribunal. We need to ensure that labeling someone with the word cult carries a pejorative connotation, that it is legally prohibited and punished similarly to terrorism. Because right now, the word cult is being used as a social weapon, one that leads to genocide. Recently, we came across an article where Dworkin was complaining that cultists are after him, that he is a victim, he who destroyed so many lives, he who labeled all of Ukraine as a cult, and now there's war there, so he feels like a victim. He who labeled all of Europe a cult. Should I now expect war in Europe?
At one point, he labeled Ukraine a cult, and we can see what's happening there now.
Forgive the comparison, but it's like Hitler complaining that the Jews don't like him. Or if the Nazis were saying they were victims of the Jews.
Or Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, crying that all the millions of dead people that his twisted propaganda is responsible for are now coming after him. And he's crying that the Nuremberg trials are coming for him, if he had lived to face them. But on the other hand, it is a huge privilege to be able to cry. to be able to cry. Because those millions of people, those whom this propaganda condemned to death, often in brutal ways, cannot cry. Their voices are not heard. And it is on behalf of these people, the nameless, the defamed, the persecuted, those whose lives are destroyed by this monstrosity, that we are sitting here and speaking.
But let's realize that all of this we've described starts with a banal label, cult.
Cult.
And this directly leads to totalitarianism. This is something none of us want. Right now, however, we need to focus on the most important thing, and that is solving the climate crisis.
We need to focus on it. But actually, what we are discussing here is the way anti-cult organizations are pushing democratic countries towards totalitarianism. In essence, introducing totalitarian narratives. Instead of focusing on the most critical thing that immediately threatens all of us, which is the climate crisis. If we look at what happened in the Czech Republic and Slovakia in mid-September, when, thank God, we were warned at least 3 days in advance, because at that time, we had actually started a climate podcast, a climate overview, so that we could keep track of what is happening worldwide, and exactly on that day, a warning was issued. Caution. Caution. On September 13th, there will likely be very heavy rainfall, which could cause floods reaching the magnitude of the floods of 1997 and 2002, and they might even be bigger. They will occur in such and such areas, and this much rain will fall. That is absolutely amazing. And hats off to the crisis teams who gave this information to people. Prepare an evacuation kit, secure your home, etc. Find out where your evacuation center is. That means there was a real opportunity for preparation, and people had a chance to get ready. But this is something we've been doing in our project. We started about a year ago making videos because, by monitoring this, we understand that these are things that can happen from one day to the next, from minute to minute, from second to second. That's why back then, we were already making videos on how to prepare an evacuation kit. It's something everyone should have at home, because getting a 3-day warning is an absolute luxury. But disasters that happen worldwide often occur from minute to minute, without warning. And that's why it's essential to have it at home. I mean, an evacuation bag. And that's why it's important to educate people. It's necessary to teach in schools how to behave and act in such situations.
I saw a video where a firefighter was trying to talk to a woman and tell her about the need to evacuate with her children, to prepare them. He was talking to a person who was completely confused, and the woman kept saying she couldn't leave because her dog was there. And I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised because, based on what he said, he had been on duty for quite a while. I think he mentioned it was his 4th day. And he spoke to this confused woman very kindly, very calmly, and helped her make the decision to evacuate. Really, thank God for these people who understand the value of human life.
And it is precisely the value of human life that isn't fully appreciated in today's society. And it is thanks to ALLATRA International Public Movement that we keep talking about the value of human life, that it is the most important thing we have as human beings. ALLATRA is striving to preserve every life on the planet Earth. It is trying to unite scientists worldwide to solve the climate crisis, to make such cataclysms and disasters less frequent, or at least minimal.
Many people still don't realize that the escalation of climate disasters will continue to accelerate. But we should understand that everything that is happening can be described physically. And if the problem lies at the level of physics, the solution also exists at the level of physics. This should be the goal of the scientific center we've been talking about, to unite scientific potential and address this problem.
Let's look at what happened over the weekend of September 14th and 15th. Let's look at all the damage. For 10 years, we've been trying to reach out to you and explain to you what will happen and what steps need to be taken. You laughed and accused us of fear-mongering. And out of your own fear, you adopted the rhetoric of the anti-cultists, rhetoric that we're a cult. Today, many people already see that it's happening much faster than we thought and than we wished. So I ask you, have you ever asked yourselves, what if we're telling the truth? What if Alatra scientists aren't some kind of cultists, but have been trying to save your skin all this time? I ask you, what then? What happens when everyone finally realizes that what they were saying is true? An apology? No one will care by then. Panic? The urge to do something right away? It'll be too late. So I'm asking you, what will you do when you come to terms with the fact that the people you mocked, pointed fingers at, and slandered were actually the ones trying to save your life? I'm asking you, what will you do then? What will we all do?